Welcome into SNY breaking news coverage. Steve Gelbs alongside Andy Martino and Todd Zeile here at the winter meetings. Edwin Diaz no longer a New York Met. As first reported by Will Salmon of The Athletic, he has agreed to a 3-year, $69 million contract with the defending champion Los Angeles Dodgers. Guys, a stunner, not in the sense that he left. That was always a possibility, a real possibility. But I think we're all surprised by the fact that the term is just 3 years and $69 million. Andy, we'll start with you. Your initial reaction to Edwin Diaz no longer being a New York Met.
Yeah, Steve, I agree that the first blush of the 3-year deal was surprising to me as well. I think zooming out super big picture here, it's just worth acknowledging that Mets fans have been asked to say goodbye to two really beloved long-term players now in Brandon Nimmo and Edwin Diaz. And I don't think there's any sugarcoating the fact that's hard. You get attached to these people as you watch them year in and year out, and just good guys and a hard thing. And with Pete Alonso uncertainty, also part of this offseason. So that's tough. I think on the brighter side, I would just say that clearly David Stearns is ambitious about winning, and this is one piece of a larger plan that we don't know the whole plan yet. We're hearing all kinds of different things about what the Mets might be up to, of course, at the winter meetings. And when the final story is written about the Mets offseason, this is going to be a piece along the way. So I'm not so worried about the Mets being a worse team because they lost Diaz. They're smart people, and they'll probably figure that out. But I am certainly acknowledging that that's a tough player for fans to say goodbye to.
Todd?
Yeah, you know what? I think initial reaction for me, honestly, is more emotional than it is calculating. It's disappointing to me. I thought Edwin would be a guy that they had a chance to return, and I thought if they lost him, it might be the Dodgers. I think there's some sentiment that Edwin felt. I think very good about the way the Dodger organization treated his brother. I think there was some level of respect and adulation there. But at the same time, I thought it was going to take 4, maybe 5 years outside of New York to lure Edwin away. And so this feels a little bit odd to me. And I think that, as Andy alluded, this may be a piece to something bigger. But I do think it's going to be tough to have the Mets come away from this saying that they would be better than they would have been with both Devin Williams and Edwin Diaz at the back of that bullpen.
Yeah, I agree with you. And even to go a step further, while I completely agree with what Andy said too about David Stearns, I think he is a brilliant baseball executive, and I have the utmost faith in him, and I'm sure that he has a plan here, and that once we see the full picture, we'll understand it a little better. But just on a micro level, forget about Edwin Diaz and Devin Williams at the back end of the pen. If all it took to sign Edwin Diaz was 3 years, $69 million, and Devin Williams was signed for 3 years, 45 plus I think it's a $6 million signing bonus, so 3 years, 51, and we don't know if there's any more money in terms of a signing bonus for Edwin Diaz over with the Dodgers. But for me, I think most people would probably agree that you take the Edwin Diaz at a little more money than the Devin Williams. And so I find it hard to sit here right now and say the Mets are better off going into next year with Devin Williams at a little less money on an annual basis, but the same amount of term than if they just signed Edwin Diaz for that contract.
They're not better today, that's for sure. So to be clear, what I meant by that was when we get to Port St. Lucie in 8 weeks or something like that, then when all's said and done, obviously the goal of this organization after a very disappointing year is to get better. But yeah, they're certainly not better with Williams as their closer today and Diaz out of the organization. So again, I try to be as restrained as I can, as we all do in our reaction to the moment, because we've been doing this long enough to know that there's just more to come.
Hey, Andy, one of the things that, and for both of you, do you think just, high level, immediate knee jerk reaction, does this put other guys like Robert Suarez
Yeah.
and Fairbanks and those guys in play like immediately? Is that something you think that needs to be done now to fill the hole, or is this a part of some other plan to let Devin be the guy at the back of the bullpen and then fill in leading up to that closer role?
Yeah, that's a great question. And obviously, my initial questions, we came on the air pretty quickly, but does this mean that something with Suarez is close or whatnot? And I'm not getting that sense right now that there's like a domino just about to fall. Although I certainly don't sit here and claim that I know everything that's happening. That's not the initial sense I got before we came on the air. They're in on your Fairbankses and your Suarezes, as other teams are. And one thing that I heard yesterday was that Suarez, because he's older, he's pitching at 35 next year. That might only be a 2-year deal for whoever signs him. So in theory, that would be something more palatable to a Stearns, who we know is just comfortable, much more comfortable, not locking in players long term, particularly pitchers. He wants to have flexibility year in and year out. So I could see an older reliever like Suarez making more sense. Fairbanks, no one's talking about 3-4 years for Fairbanks right now. That's not what you hear. So that would make some sense. And I guess it's worth remembering that obviously this would be way better with Diaz in it as currently constructed. But you used the word need, Todd, so that made me think, okay, it's Williams, Brooks Raley, who was nasty last year when he came back from Tommy John. AJ Mincher will be back shortly after opening day. So there's a solid back end there to begin with. But yes, they could use one more high end arm, and I know that they've been talking to guys.
I guess it begs the question too, and we'll have to wait and see just how much of a priority they are actually putting on adding one more high leverage guy from outside the organization. Again, the Diaz term that's not a bad term. That's not a bad term. And so if they're not willing to go those 3 years for Edwin Diaz, you wonder, with a guy like David Stearns, who, as we've alluded to in the past, and as you just talked about a little bit, Andy, is hesitant to invest big money in relief pitchers because of their volatility. You do wonder if maybe they are going to reallocate the money and the assets elsewhere. Still need to get at least one big-time starting pitcher, fill in outfield needs, and you wonder if they look at the back end of their bullpen right now and say, we have Devin Williams in the fold. We expect him to bounce back from last season. We've got those two other guys that you just mentioned, Andy, and we can develop relief pitchers in the organization that will do it. For me, again, it's one thing if Edwin Diaz went out and got a 5-year deal somewhere, but the fact that he got a 3, and I know he wanted to be back with the Mets. This wasn't a situation where Diaz was like, I want to get out of here. I want to see what else is out there. There's nothing the Mets could do. I do wonder if the thought process becomes, hey, barring a big time steal on the free agent market, we're just going to keep it with what we have, go in house, develop some arms, and try and fill the needs elsewhere.
That's a great point, Steve. Go ahead, Todd.
Sorry, Andy. I was just going to say that one of the things that you touched on there, Steve, was one of the things that I think was my initial question to myself that nobody really knows except Edwin himself, which was whether or not there was any issue for him to remain as a Met, or if he really wanted to remain in this uniform and be a guy that kind of locks down the latter part of his career as a New York Met. It always felt to me that he was a guy that wanted to be there. He is a guy that's proven that he can pitch there. And so the initial reaction when I saw the terms of the deal made me think, wow, maybe Edwin really didn't want to be a New York Met, because those terms didn't seem unattainable by any stretch of the imagination for the Mets. And so it is going to be interesting, I think, to see some of the other dominoes as we talk about start to fall. And what's becoming more obvious to me now than maybe when we got here on Sunday afternoon is that this winter meetings and this offseason may prove to be quite a bit more interesting than maybe I originally thought it was going to be coming down here.
Yeah, that's a great point, Todd. Because again, the Mets are ambitious to obviously not just make the playoffs, but become a championship team. At the end of last year, they weren't even close. We've now seen a subtraction, a major subtraction. So I think interesting is a key word there, Todd. Like, and I'm not sitting here trying to imply that, like, there's some major thing cooking that's going to drop any second, but there's just, when you have an organization that's that ambitious, and clearly they're more proactive about remaking the makeup of the team than we even thought they would be going into the offseason, with Nimmo already gone and now Diaz gone. It does certainly make you think, like, well, gee, who's coming in? Because this is just going to be real different. And in order to get different, you have to have some interesting stuff happen in an offseason. So I think that's a great point. It'll be the December and January in Mets land should be pretty interesting, to say the least.
Hey, Todd, I want to ask you a question from a player mentality perspective, because in some respects, this deal reminds me of, I believe it was, there goes the ring light. See, I was trying to be all technical here, and now you've lost some of the brightness on me, because that's gone.
You
Well,
look,
now you look like
Steve,
you're in your Florida tan now. See,
Yeah,
okay.
right. That's right.
Did you ever see that Seinfeld where that woman was like really beautiful and really
Yeah.
hideous depending on the light?
Yeah,
Wow,
which one
that's
am
what
I
just
right now?
happened to you. Yeah.
No, so what I was going to ask, though, it reminds me of the winter meetings. I believe we were in Nashville after 2015 when the Mets traded for Neil Walker and let Daniel Murphy go to the Washington Nationals after that incredible postseason run. And I remember having this discussion even early on through the season about the level of pressure that exists to perform in your first year in a Mets uniform to begin with. But now you are also replacing a hero to the fan base, and how critical it was that Neil Walker got off to the great start that he did in 2016 to take some of that pressure off. From Devin Williams' perspective right now, just how much more difficult, Todd, does this make it for him, knowing what the reaction will be should he stumble at all out of the gates, given that he is now officially replacing someone in Edwin Diaz?
I think it's a good question. And I think that Andy may have a little bit more insight on this because he knows the person personally from covering Mets and Yankees last season. But I do think he is a guy that does actually right now, if we went to Port St. Lucie today, and even if they make a bunch of other great moves along the way, and Devin Williams is slated as the guy that's going to be the back of the bullpen guy. He's the closer. He's the new Edwin Diaz. We got to figure out a new song coming out of the bullpen to get the fans used to. All of those things are riding on Devin Williams' shoulders. Yeah, I think it adds a little bit of pressure. It adds a little bit of emphasis. What I know of Devin Williams from just being an observer of this game is that he's a confident kid. He's a confident person in his own ability. He stumbled in New York last year on a big stage after being a big offseason signing with the Yankees, and never seemed to completely lose faith in himself. We saw that with Ryan Helsley last year, where it felt like Helsley, a guy that is a bona fide closer himself, it came from a very different market, came from a little bit of a different mindset. When he stumbled in New York, he had a really tough time gaining his confidence and finding a way through it. I don't see that being the same for Devin Williams. So maybe he's a guy that can take a couple of bumps and still get going and be a successful guy in New York, even with a few lumps early. He showed that he could do it last year. So I think it's a great point. I don't know. I think they feel that the makeup of him as a person and what he has shown in his past, and David knows him from Milwaukee as well, would suggest that they have confidence that he can make that transition and be the guy in a Mets uniform.
I'll tell you a story about that from Yankee Stadium last year that relates to this. Is that obviously in the previous season when the Yankees made the World Series run, Luke Weaver emerged as this dominant closer. But when the Yankees traded for Williams, Weaver became the setup guy out of the gate at the beginning of last season. And when Williams was struggling one game in April, I was there in the press box. He started struggling, and before he gave up the lead, like before he even given up the big hit, which he ultimately did in this appearance, the Yankee Stadium was chanting, "We want Weaver." And so he's faced that already. At least Edwin's not there. We want Edwin. I mean, maybe they'll say that if he struggles, but Edwin's won't be sitting back there to come in. So my point is, he's been through that, and I talked to Devin about that at the time, and it of course bothered him. It's like, why are the home fans essentially rooting for my failure before I've even failed? That was a tough one, and he did blow that save. But the chant started first, like I said. So that was a tough thing, and it's something that's already in Devin Williams' like bank of life experience, and it probably won't get worse than that. That was a rough night.
All right, so again, for those just joining us, Edwin Diaz, 3 years, $69 million deal to the Los Angeles Dodgers. He is no longer a New York Met, one of the great tenures in Mets history when it comes to bullpen arms is officially over. Before we go here on this breaking news coverage, let's just transition quickly to talk about what's next for the Mets. It kind of gets lost in the shuffle right now from our point of view, but a few minutes before the Edwin Diaz news dropped, it was reported that Kyle Schwarber is back with the Phillies for 5 years, so that's a big bet that the Mets are interested off the board. We know Pete Alonso is making his way to Orlando if he's not here already. What do you look at as the next priority and where the Mets go, Andy?
I think it's actually hard identifying the next priority. And you guys are here and you see like they've got a lot of irons in the fire. So I don't know if it's up to them what the next priority is, or if it's just like which deal's gonna land first. I think clearly there's already the relievers that we've been talking to. There's the starting pitching, trade and free agent market. The link between the Mets and Michael King, starting pitcher, has been pretty strong over the past 24 hours or so, but there are other suitors there. And then there's all kinds of trade conversations that don't even trickle down often from upstairs in the suite where they're working down to the lobby where we're working. So the next, I bet you they've got 10 next priorities.
Well,
you want to pick up where Andy left off?
Sure. 10 irons in the fires, I'm guessing what Andy was going to. And, he's got his finger on the pulse. I think that for me, looking at what they're going to do, I think if Mets fans think that Schwarber off the board is going to make the Alonso thing move quicker, I wouldn't hold your breath on that. I think, as Andy's reported, as it's continued to feel, it may be a little while for Pete to get to the point that he's comfortable to sign. I don't see that necessarily happening here at the winter meetings. There's still too many other chips that can be played. But I do think the Schwarber signing, if anybody really thought the Mets were going to be in on that in a big way and have a chance to lure him over, I never felt that was realistic. I felt that Kyle Schwarber wanted to remain a Philadelphia Philly. It seemed the right fit for him. And any other conversations he was having were conversations to see where the Phillies were going to land. So that one wasn't surprising to me at all. And I think actually clears a little bit of the noise for the Mets to continue, the pursuit in whatever that means of Pete Alonso. But I think starting pitching, as we've talked about ad nauseum already at this winter meetings, has to be the priority. And that looks like, I like the Michael King pursuit. I think he's a guy that's got great upside. I think he's a guy that can be brought in for what in today's terms would be a reasonable term, and reasonable for me is lesser years for a guy that's still young and has a lot of upside. And as we've talked about some of the big guys on the board, the Alcantaras, the Mackenzie Gore, the Peraltas, those guys right now are still, I think, sitting out there with King's ransom being asked. And I'm not sure that David's ready to part with what it's going to take to get those guys, at least at this point.
Well, we already lost Andy, so I think that's a good sign that this should wrap up our breaking news coverage. We have a lot of questions, as I know all of you do, about this transaction with Edwin Diaz going to Los Angeles Dodgers. The good news is that tonight at 6:30 on Mets Hot Stove Live here from Orlando, we will have David Stearns joining us on set. We will also have the presumptive Mets closer, Devin Williams, joining us on set so we can ask him about the situation as well. So be sure to tune in tonight at 6:30 as we go live. Our breaking news coverage, once again, Edwin Diaz, no longer a New York Met. Thanks so much for watching. For Andy Martino and Todd Zeile, I'm Steve Gelbs. We'll be without you throughout the day, should anything else happen.